Well, good evening to everyone. This is the Human Relations Commission meeting of October the 10th. And we'll do a roll call.
Chair Kralik,
Present.
Commissioner Lee,
Present.
Commissioner Begier, Commissioner Savage,
Present.
Commissioner Smith,
Present.
Commissioner Stinger, Vice Chair Shu.
Present.
Thank you.
Well, we're all together. That's great news, guys.
Let's write this one down in history.
Yeah. Agenda changes, requests, deletions. Commissioner Lee.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would like to request that we move agenda item 3 to second on the agenda.
Anybody have any thoughts about that?
Is that a motion?
Yeah, I move to move agenda item 3 to number 2.
Such a motion.
Anybody want to discuss that? I think it's a great idea. Let's do that. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So oral communications, members of the public, I don't have any other cards other than this one. But since that will be the first item of business, the after YCS is first? Okay, I did not understand that. We do? Okay. All right, so consideration of HRC's endorsement of the Youth Community Service event, Strengthening Families and Developmental Relationships, which will be held on November 2nd, 2019. This is brought to us by Commissioner Stinger. Commissioner Stinger, would you like to give us an introduction, please?
I would. Thank you. I received a lovely note from Ashley, and I was very intrigued by the program and impressed with your credentials, and I hope that you can present to us your program.
Yes. So, hello everyone. I'm Ashley Yee Mazawa from Youth Community Service. So as a part of our Youth Connectedness Initiative, we are offering an event on November 2nd called Strengthening Families. We're inviting Project Cornerstone, or not Project Cornerstone, Project Cornerstone is one of our co-sponsors, but we're inviting Search Institute to come and present on their developmental relationships. And I have a handout for you kind of detailing the developmental relationships, so you have kind of a basis for what the workshop will be on. But essentially, the workshop is aimed to promote healthy relationships for our young people in the community. So the part of what Search Institute's research has shown is that when young people have healthy relationships with adults in their lives, they have more positive outcomes. And so we feel like this is very valuable information for our greater community to have. And we are really very much looking forward to learning more from our friends at Search Institute. And we would love to have an endorsement.
Ashley, can you just give like a couple-minute overview of the Youth Connectedness Initiative that the city and the county is helping to fund? So it's in its third year. So if you could tell the commission just a little bit about that, because this is part of that.
Yeah, so our new program, which is in its third year, as Minka noted, is funded from the county and the city. The program is aimed at fostering healthy relationships and connections between youth and adults. So we have two branches as a part of that program. So we have a youth component of peer leaders who work on service learning projects to promote that mission. And we also have a parent component, which involves this larger event where we do hold educational programs for the adults in the community, including parents and other youth workers.
Tell us a little bit about how you became involved in YCS.
Yes, so I have been with YCS for 5 years. I I'm very passionate about supporting youth and youth voice in the community. I've been interested in supporting youth since I was one. I actually grew up in Palo Alto coaching AYSO soccer as a teenager, so I've always been involved with service and working with younger people. And I was very lucky to find this job opening with Youth Community Service, an agency that was around when I was in high school in Palo Alto, and I can't think of a better job to to be with.
And Minka, is this one of the groups that we support through the HISRAP process?
Yes, so we support Youth Community Services, some of their other programs, and then the Youth Connectedness Initiative is supported by a separate city grant and along with the county. But YCS has been a HISRAP grantee 15 years, more than that.
Yeah, I recognize the name. That's good. Go ahead.
I think it was 2 years ago. When I first got, how long have I been on the commission?
1 year.
1 year. So when we first started a year ago, it all blends together. I went to the YCI meeting with Lily and that group, and we've actually had faith leaders working with them over the past year. I think they're doing some of the best intentional cross-disciplinary work in the city, because I feel like schools focus on it, church focus on it, city focus on it, but what I really like about this initiative is that it's cross-disciplinary, so it touches a lot of different avenues in the city. So I've been watching and following the program for last year, and I emphatically would love to see us get engaged on some level.
Other inputs from the commissioners? Please.
Well, like I mentioned earlier, my kids got involved with YCS before. They really enjoy it. I feel this is a wonderful organization for, promoting those kind of events. Also, the kids, especially for the teenagers, they can learn a lot how to deal with each other and with the adults. So by saying that, I really feel we are lucky to have this organization to work with. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions from commissioners? Not hearing any, we'll go to oral communications. Not hearing any oral communications
Or on the subject.
on this subject. We're going to move on to consideration of an endorsement. So, Commissioner Stinger, would you help us with that, please?
Yes, I would note that this is involving youth and connectedness, absence of isolation or addressing isolation, and those are two of our work plan items. And given that, I would like to move that we endorse the proposal, the request.
I'll second that. Any discussion?
I just had a question about endorsement. What does that mean? Like, are we going to be on your flyers, or what does it mean by, or are we just, when we're asked about it, but just in general, since I'm new?
How I would see that is, you could set certain stipulations to your endorsement. Say, we will endorse, so therefore that means we would appreciate, our endorsement means we would like to be on the flyer. Endorsement means that you are in support and promoting the organization and the theme of the event.
Request from Ashley and from the group was specifically non-economic
Okay.
sponsorship. So with that, it is really a vote of confidence and the ability to use our name as endorsers, not economic supporters.
And does it also mean that if we go to the event, that we could say we're representing, if we endorse it?
Are you specifically asking to say a word at the event, or
No.
were you specifically asking?
I'm just saying, like,
How you identify
how
yourself.
you identify yourself. Is once we endorse it, does that mean that if we go to the event, we could say we are
You certainly can. I mean, you can wear your HRC HRC badge. We're so happy to be here. We help to
That's all I mean, 'cause I'm-
endorse this event
right.
in the community. We're glad you could come.
Yeah. Not that I want to speak, I'm just saying, like, because sometimes we go to events and you don't wear that hat. And I'm just wanting to make sure that when we endorse it, we could also have that, say we're endorsing it.
Commissioner Savage.
I think it's a great idea and good seeing you again. Good to see you too.
Okay, we'll have a vote on the endorsement. All in favor? Aye. Carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming to see us.
Thank you for having me. Can I leave these with you? Should I
That would be
just send them
great.
to you?
Look forward to working with your organization.
Thank you so much.
I don't want to split the commission, but she is also a gun graduate.
Because of the agenda change, we're going to move to item number 3 next, consideration of child care pilot program. We have a presentation from Commissioner Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this was a presentation that the chair and I worked on. It's on our work plan, and it sort of falls into a couple of categories here. And so really what we're talking about here is considering asking the city council to pilot a program to offer childcare at key or important city and community meetings to help foster greater and broader community participation in local decision-making, in particular from residents who have kids, who have young children. So often we see how challenging it is for those folks to attend meetings in the evenings and to engage. So from my perspective, I consider this both a gender equality and a family inclusion initiative. I say it's a gender equality initiative because unfortunately, on average, women tend to bear the majority of the child care responsibilities in society. But with that being said, this is something that I think will benefit both men and women. We've seen a lot of men in other communities push for these initiatives, especially as they begin to have families and children. But I also consider this a family inclusion and a civic engagement initiative too. So looking through multiple prisms here. Let's see. Yeah, could you bring it up from the email, please? Maybe I just do it like that. Okay. So the first slide here talks about some of the need for this kind of service. In the last National Citizen Survey, which the city participates in, we can see that 25% of residents attended a local public meeting. And when asked, 25%, yes, that's right. Yeah, so, yes, so looks like there's two, sorry. Okay, yeah, these are two of the same charts, so just showing the data somewhat differently. I was kind of confused by the two charts. So last year it was 25% of folks attended a local meeting. And when asked whether there was available and affordable quality childcare in Palo Alto, 37% of those surveyed indicated that it was excellent or good. And so we can see that overall that the need for affordable quality childcare is lacking. And obviously this is just one small component of a larger childcare issue. So why the HRC? Why are the chair and myself bringing this to this commission? So if we look at our mission in the municipal code in 2.22.050, this commission has the discretion to act when the commission finds that any person or group does not benefit fully from public or private opportunities or resources in the community. So when we look at the national survey again, we see that 35% of Palo Altans responded that there was a member in their household under the age of 18. And it's estimated that 23% of the population is under age 18. So a non-trivial portion of the population has kids or are kids in our community. And it's clear from both anecdotal evidence and from what we hear from folks in our community and in other communities that there are people who do not enjoy fully in the opportunity to engage in the civic process by attending city and community meetings, participating in public comment, and providing their input on very important issues. So the next couple of slides are some quotes from parents and leaders in other communities who have done pilot programs or who have explored programs in other communities. So here we have Lisa from Ithaca, and I'm just going to read it. She says, "I've been feeling pretty strongly, ever since I had a baby, that holding these types of government meetings at night is automatically exclusionary. There are going to be categories of people who cannot participate. If the government is going to be deciding on local policies that will impact families, but families can't go to the meetings, then we are just going to have business as usual. Having more women who have traditionally had primary caregiving responsibilities get involved in local government could really change things on a bigger scale. If more communities adopt these types of policies that make it possible for women to get involved, I think we could see much broader changes in overall government policies that better reflect the American people." Here is a quote from Boston University study where they looked at several thousand city and community meeting minutes. They found that residents most likely to participate in planning commission meetings across America were older, male, longtime residents. Achieving more diverse participation is a potential buffer against existing political inequities. Here's Lisa, a professor at Amherst. "Weekday evening meetings deter people from running for office or serving on a commission. The schedule is predicated on a 9-to-5 workday and one parent easily being able to stay at home with the kids. You have older public servants who are over 65. You have older generation of leaders and public workers. They're aging out, and there's not the influx of newer, younger folks to replace them." And this is the mayor of Brookhaven. He said, "Citizen involvement should not compete with families or family values. I think that if families aren't first to make that choice, they will choose to participate." Over the next couple of slides, I have done some very brief case studies. These are not meant to be exhaustive in any means, but to give a sense of what some cities have tried and what range of options staff and council could consider if this commission decides to make that recommendation. So if we look at Ithaca, New York, population about 31,000, they started back in May of 2019 a policy of offering childcare at all city council and 4 commission meetings. And the way that they did it was by employing teenagers who were already employed by the community center to watch children at a converted city hall conference rooms. These teenagers have already been trained and are covered by their existing insurance policy. And for this pilot program, they budgeted $10,000 with a ratio of 10-to-1. And they have 2 teens standing by at each meeting ready to babysit. If no one shows up within the first 30 minutes, they sort of get paid to go home. So this is sort of on the very low end of the spectrum in terms of what could possibly be done. $10,000 is fairly reasonable amount. Pittsburgh, slightly larger city of 300,000, they began a pilot program in fall of 2018 where they had 2 components. They had both an internal facing component and an external facing component. The internal facing component was they would offer 2 childcare days for city employees when the school district was closed. So for city employees at City Hall, when the school was closed, they offered childcare for 2 days. And they had around 20 to 25 folks attend. And that program roughly would have cost $4,000 to run, but in this case, they got a childcare startup in Pittsburgh to offer the services for free as part of the pilot. Externally, they tried to pilot offering childcare at 2 community meetings on public safety and redevelopment, and at each of those, they had about 15 plus kids attend the meeting. And they did both pre-registration and allowed folks to show up at the door. And again, they use a childcare startup in Pittsburgh who provided the services for free. The market value of which was around $4,000 each, around $200 an hour for 2 to 3 staff members. After that successful pilot program, they issued an RFP in December of 2018. So they moved fairly fast here. In December of 2018, for a $40,000 one-year contract, they offered internally 15 childcare days per year where city employees could bring their kids to City Hall when school was closed. And externally, they offered childcare at 20 city or community meetings a year as chosen by the mayor. I spoke with Tiffany Simone in the mayor's office, and they had indicated that the first year has gone very successfully, and they plan on, they're in the process of doing their 2020 RFP. They will definitely continue it and are likely to increase it. These numbers are tentative, but they're looking at increasing it to 30 city or community meetings per year as designated by the mayor. And so far, a handful of other cities have reached out to them. She indicated that most of them are smaller than Pittsburgh, somewhere around 40 to 60,000 in population size who are interested. So for our purposes, I think we're probably going to focus this discussion on the external-facing community aspect of it, but Pittsburgh had both aspects, both community engagement as well as childcare for employees. Brookhaven, Georgia, around 54,000. This was one of the quotes earlier. They started a 6-month pilot program in 2017 that was offered by their Parks and Recreation Department, where they offered children supervised activities. They did it every second and fourth Tuesdays of the month during their council work sessions that began at 3:30 in the afternoon, as well as their council meetings, which started at 7. And they had specific requirements that the children must be in good health and between the ages of 5 and 12. So here's a list of some of the other cities that we've been able to identify so far who are considering or in some stage of offering childcare at their community events. So a wide range of communities there, including Durham, where I went to law school. So that's great to see that they're working on that. As I mentioned, these examples are just illustrative of the possible models. We know that the problem is the same, but the model that works best for Palo Alto may be different. And so, we really learn by doing. That's really the startup method. Right? You try something out, you adjust it as necessary, as opposed to spending 2 or 3 years trying to think your way through it and then finding out it doesn't work. So, you learn by doing, and so that's sort of going to be the approach that the chair and myself are going to recommend here. So here's a rough outline. We didn't want to be too prescriptive, but we thought it was important to at least give our thoughts to council as to what a potential pilot program should look like. So we thought, a 6-month pilot program was long enough to see if it would work, but not too long that it would be financially or operationally burdensome. We thought it would be important to provide childcare at the city council retreat that the council does every, January or February time period, because that's really where they set sort of the themes and the 4 or 5 issues that they focus on. We also thought that 2 of the big issues potentially in the community that we might see a lot of public interest in were Cubbly and grade crossing. So to the extent that we can provide childcare at meetings where Cubbly or grade crossing are discussed would be fantastic. I know when the council was discussing Cubbly, there was some indication that the members who attended those 4 sessions had voted as to what their preferences were, and one of the council members had indicated that those results weren't necessarily indicative of the larger population because the folks who were able to attend were of a particular demographic. We also thought potentially that we could offer childcare at other city commission retreats. We saw 15 folks attend our retreat this year, and to the extent that parents and families are interested in some of the work of the other commissions, we thought maybe as a baby step, providing childcare at those retreats so that the community could engage in those commissions' process of setting their priorities and work plan for the year. And maybe eventually it evolves to offering childcare at more of those meetings. But we thought the commission retreats would be a good place to potentially start. We also wanted to give the city some flexibility in terms of if there were other city or community meetings or events that they thought there would be huge interest in, or the city has an interest in getting a lot of feedback, that the mayor or the city manager could designate those, like they did in Pittsburgh. Some of the other softer recommendations that the chair and I wanted to include was, encouraging the city to either have a policy or just a strong cultural practice of, the city encouraging more of the meetings to happen on the weekends during hours when working parents are available. So oftentimes we see meetings during the work day, which we would argue should be discouraged or minimized if possible. But obviously there are complications there in terms of having staff available the reason why we have meetings during the day, during the work day, is because that's when staff's available. So that's certainly a possible quirk that we have to work out. Another recommendation that we would make at this time is that agendas be rearranged so that items of community interest, which are likely to solicit public input, are scheduled first. If you've been to a city council meeting, they start at 5, but usually the first hour and a half is closed session. They do the city manager's report, which is nice, but it's more just the community listening. So to the extent that they might rearrange things, sort of like what we did tonight, so that folks who can only attend earlier in the meeting can do so, and having more of the staff reports and informational items at the end. The other recommendation was to allow speakers with kids to speak first or give them some sort of priority. As an example, PAUSD allows students to speak first during their public comment section because they want them to go home and study and rest and not be at a school board meeting for 4 or 5 hours. And so the current recommendation or the current proposal that I'd like the commission to discuss is whether we would recommend this kind of very loose framework or suggestion to the city council that they direct staff to craft and implement a pilot program for implementation in 2020 that includes these elements, and that at some point in fall of 2020, and sort of after the 6-month period, they come back both to the commission and council with sort of how do things go? Is it something that we can keep going indefinitely? What sort of funding mechanisms are there, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the bulk of the main proposal. Alternatively, we might, as a commission, I would propose that we do both, but alternatively, if the staff itself wanted to go on and do an independent effort to fund a pilot program on its own, then we would endorse that effort if it ends up being quicker and swifter than going through council, because we know that recommendations from us to council often take months, if not years, to do. And in the case of Pittsburgh, that was an initiative out of their mayor's office of neighborhood services. So, we can make the main recommendation here to council, but to the extent that staff is like, oh, that's a great idea, we don't really need councilors, go ahead to do it, we're going to look into it ourselves, that would be sort of a second thing that we would say, yes, we are on board with. And so those are all of the things that I had prepared. I wanted to keep it simple, straightforward. There's a lot of detail that needs to be figured out, but I think our practice in the past has been to really defer a lot of that detail work to staff who are more intimately familiar with what might be doable, workable, and to leave those decisions to council and to staff. So.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I just wanted to mention before we go to questions from the commissioners that, as we know from our retreat, we have come up with kind of a visual graph of how to handle items in our work plan. And one of the things that we did encourage is for people who have a work plan item to bring them forward, because sometimes gaining the wisdom of other commissioners on a project like this can be quite valuable. And so I really want to encourage everyone to ask some questions at this time. One of the questions that I have is really in regard to priority for childcare. And so I'll just open up the discussion with that question, Steve, and have you think about it and answer it, and hopefully other people will chime in too. You know, one of the things that's impressed me in my short spell here is that we've heard from parents, especially parents who have children with special needs, and they have vocally come to our retreat and come to other meetings talking about a lack of services for childcare in the context of some of the Enjoy catalog items and other things like that. And you know, the one question that I have is as we address this issue, you know, how does this attendance at meetings fit in with the prioritization for childcare in the community? And do you think that we should, you know, try to poll people about what childcare needs are most important for the community in making a recommendation? You know, one of the things that I thought about when I saw this is it's very cogent. It borrows from other communities. It certainly is sensible in keeping with our strategy, with our mission. But how does this answer the needs of parents who have come before us and told us that, you know, their child, you know, doesn't have the availability of going to the swimming pool or can't go to some Enjoy programs? And you know, those parents really, they need a break sometimes, and they need child care. Now maybe that's specialized child care. And so I'm opening up that question to get others' views of that. But my own thoughts about it is, this is cogent, it makes sense, but how does bringing, let's say, this work plan initiative up through to finalization balance with the other needs? So I don't know if someone might.
Yeah, I can answer that, Mr.
Well,
Chairman.
we get input from
Oh,
everyone.
are we
Yeah.
having questions or are we doing a discussion?
Yeah, I think questions, but I think
Okay.
I think the questions can, you know, I ask a question and I'm open to other people providing input on that question besides us.
Okay.
I know that we brought
Yeah.
this up.
I guess that's kind of what my question was going to be, but it's part of your discussion is, I was wondering how much this is going to cost, even the pilot program, because the city council is going to, and where is it going to come from? And does that mean that the money's not going to go for other services? You know, and my other question was, you mentioned how many people were coming after the child care. I was wondering, there was nothing about what, if people were coming without child care before this pilot.
So let me answer the first batch of questions. In terms of childcare priorities, the way that I think we've been talking about this, even when we were setting the work plan, was this particular proposal is just one small part of childcare. You know, I think we have to be very honest about that. And you know, quite frankly, I don't know if this is the highest priority when it comes to childcare. It may not be, but in my perspective, this is what's shovel ready. This is what's ready to go. And I think, you know, when we were talking about the work plan, we talked about childcare very broadly, but also specifically about childcare and how it intersects with civic engagement and participation at meetings. So I think, you know, when we think of the chart, the process of what we're doing, this is a shovel-ready thing that we could make a recommendation on fairly easy. This might be a simple item, but the larger item of childcare is a more complex item where we take some of the feedback here, we do more listening sessions with members of the community, and we do that sort of iterative process that's sort of in the table that Gabe put together during the retreat. So, you know, to be perfectly honest, I don't know if this is a priority, but it's shovel ready. It's something that other communities have done. It's something that I've heard that there is a need for. I don't know if it's the number one or number two need, but there is certainly a need for it. And so while we work on and try to address some of the other priorities or higher priority items, this sort of can make its way through the bureaucracy of the city.
I just want to be cautious that we're just asking questions. I just want to be cautious that we're asking questions about the presentation, then allowing the public to speak, and then having more broad-scale discussion after that.
Okay, Commissioner Savage.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great idea, and I think back to when my kids were little, had an opportunity, been there for childcare, my whole world would have opened up a lot more. But I think it's just fraught with numerous details, some of which probably haven't even been thought of. So I don't know. I think it's a good start, but I don't think it's nearly ready to go anywhere out of commission.
Why don't we, that's more
But
of
you
a
have a question
discussion,
about
but just
any
the
of- yeah,
questions right now,
questions
please.
No.
Okay,
I did ask the question, how much do you think?
yes, how
The
much do you
cost.
think the cost would be?
So again, some of the examples had indicate some of the range. I mean, we saw one that was 10,000, one that was 40,000, and that 40,000 might increase in 2020. So those are illustrative of some numbers that other cities have done. But again, I think in the past, we, as a commission, we've decided that it's not our job to identify the funding source, and it's really up to our elected officials and staff to be like, okay, well, we have this recommendation from the commission. Do we think it's a priority, enough of a priority to fund, and then have staff look into where that funding could come from? So the examples were there to give us a sense of what it could possibly cost, but again, depending on how we structure it and how Palo Alto wants to do it, it could be very cheap, very expensive. It just depends on what the preferences are of our elected officials and what staff thinks that we can bear at this time. And again, a pilot program is designed to see what's possible without committing us down the road to a huge financial ticket.
Commissioner Smith.
I'll wait till discussion. I have more of a discussion, not a question.
I'm sorry, I just responded to your light being on.
Oh, sorry. Oh,
Your light's on.
okay. I was just saying I have more of a discussion than a question, so I'll
Great.
hold it to discussion.
Okay, we're going to go ahead if there's no more questions, and we're going to go to oral communications. Lisa Bertelson-Kivett. Good evening, Lisa, and thank you for coming to the commission meeting. We appreciate your attendance.
Sure, thank you. This is actually the first time I've been to one of these meetings, but I'll tell you why I'm here. I'm a VP of the PTA for Addison Elementary, and I'm here on behalf of myself and Lucia Ugarte, who's PTA for Walter Hayes. I just found out about this pilot 2 days ago at our PTA meeting and jumped at the opportunity to be here because I can say without a doubt that there are at least 5 families just on Addison PTA who would love to be involved, but it's very difficult to do that when you have kids. I have 2 7-year-olds who left about 20 minutes ago to go to bed. A lot of times our spouses are out of town, so there's nobody else to watch the kids, and finding sitters, I wish it was as easy as it was when I was a kid and babysitting, but it's not. I can tell you too that a lot of us are very engaged in the community. I'm personally engaged with Cornerstone, with Ravenswood Adopt a Teacher program, involved in Hotel de Zinc, which helps the homeless in Palo Alto. But my involvement is all predicated on things that I can do during the day. Whether my children are in school or they're out of school, at least it's during waking hours, and I can be involved in the community. I certainly think that any community benefits from civic involvement, and I would certainly love to be involved after hours, but I'm prohibited from doing so. I will say that we had kind of a similar situation at Addison. We have an annual fundraiser which covers a lot of the activities and programs that we have for school children in our school, and that happens every October. We found that many parents could not go to this evening fundraiser because they didn't have childcare. So we started offering childcare for them, subsidized by the school, and within days, the tickets that we had were sold out. So I think I can say firsthand there's definitely a need when people want to get involved to have someone who can help them do so. So those are all of my comments, but would welcome anything. And I think not only some of the reasons you listed there, but I think specific to Addison, anytime there are zoning changes that affect our school, which is happening right now, certainly what Stanford is doing and how that's impacting local schools, anything involving the successful integration of children from East Palo Alto, and their busing. I mean, there's many, many issues that we talk about in PTA, but many of us don't have the latitude to be here and talk in a much larger forum and have our voices heard. So we would appreciate that opportunity.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to item D, which is the HRC consideration of the child care pilot program. Steve, do you want to lead that item?
I think we can just continue the discussion that we began during questions. I think one comment I might make before we do that is, you know, my personal style in terms of when and how the commission makes recommendations. For me, this is enough detail for me to confidently make a recommendation. I think we could spend the next 2 years trying to dig deep into exactly what all the other cities have done and trying to find the funding sources. But at the end of the day, you know, this commission just doesn't have the bandwidth to do that, and we don't have the access to, we don't know what the financial or regulatory burdens are on the city. And so for us to try to speculate and try to come up with something more specific may be not a good use of time. And I say that having, you know, one of our prior initiatives, I wanted to go very specific. And I think we reined that back a bit, knowing that there were things that we don't know and that it'd be very difficult for us to know those things before we presented. And so in that case, we moved forward with a broader suggestion, allowing council and staff to give more direction and more time to figure out the specifics. So for me, I think if we think that something's important enough, I think the details can be determined at a later point. But just getting it on the agenda, I think, is a good start. And that sort of philosophical approach to process may be something that I would suggest that we bring up during our joint meeting with council in terms of, do they prefer that we bring them something very simple like this, or do they really want us to, you know, have more data or have a specific dollar amount asked? And I think that sort of philosophical approach would be a good question to ask during the retreat.
Yeah, just to clarify your discussion point, I think one of the things you said is in this discussion, this is not the only priority for child care in the community. It may not be the highest priority, but this is a cogent argument as to why this could help folks who want to participate in community meetings. The other thing that I heard you say, if I can clarify, is that this does not prevent the commission itself from continuing to gather data on child care priorities to hold its own pilot programs. And in fact, we may do that as part of the work plan, continuing work, reporting up to the council. So as I see it, you view this as a pilot and you view it as answering one priority and not foreclosing further work.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep, you got it.
Commissioner Smith.
Well, first of all, thank you for the thoroughness in this collection of information. A couple of observations. I think it's too focused with points 2 through 5. And this is, you know, every time we talk to the computer, it breaks. No, so this is my thing. Putting together childcare is a significant thing that's going to require that input from the city legal office. What do we need to do for childcare? You know, what does that look like legally? It's going to require input from staff. What is our capacity? Which budget pockets can we go to get it from? So I think right now it would be probably best for us to kick the can up the road and start finding partners with this initiative. So going to council, going to staff and saying, hey, these are some examples we found. We found everything from a range of the Cadillac where, you know, you got $200 per hour and you've got 3 people and you do it at these meetings. And the meetings are either predetermined or at the discretion of the mayor. And there's a lot of really good information there that I think we can't determine in a vacuum. What I do know is that this is absolutely critical. The city of Palo Alto currently has 18% of the population over 65, but its volunteer and its civic engagement is significantly represented by that group. We have 26% of our population as this point that's under 18. So that means 26% of our population needs some kind of childcare to activate the rest of those people so that we can even get more people engaged. Because the reality is more people are leaving this area because of expense, lack of voice, and the inability to be engaged in any way. The cost of childcare in Palo Alto, I know, I found out this month. The cost of childcare is astronomical. It is a financial burden for somebody to even show up to one of these meetings. You know.
Any other commissioners would like to have a discussion of this item?
I
Commissioner
would,
Steen.
yeah. It wasn't until just the end of your presentation when I realized that your objective was optimizing childcare. I was looking at it as optimizing attendance at meetings, engagement, and I wondered if you looked at any comparisons. Providing more childcare would certainly be one approach. Changing the scheduling would be another approach, using different interactive means. Any comparisons of what would most engage the population? Maybe it's the topics or the way
So
that the
I
questions
don't quite
raised.
understand the distinction you made there. Could you help me understand when you say optimizing childcare versus optimizing engagement? I'm not quite. It's a bit of both, right? I mean, in order to encourage engagement, really, this is a civic engagement initiative, right? To get folks who have kids, who have families, to be able to engage more in the civic process more. And one way that we could do that, one way that we've been hearing from folks that we could do that, is offering childcare. So it's a childcare initiative, but I think at its heart is really a civic engagement initiative, if that makes sense.
It does. I'm just thinking that I just hypothetically don't know, or I don't know whether offering childcare would have brought me out to a meeting at night.
Well, that's the beauty of a pilot program, right?
Yeah,
It's-
but so that's why I was asking the question, did you look at any other comparators? What happens when you take the meeting to the
Oh,
neighborhoods?
gotcha.
You know, what other polls have we done to say, what would bring you to this meeting? You know, what would make you, sometimes it's, my voice isn't heard, so why would I bother?
Gotcha, okay.
So one of the things, I'm going to push back slightly on that. There are things that are the functioning of government that happen in certain physical locations because of simple standards like this conference room. They probably spend $100,000 so they can record us so that we can be in compliance. And there's certain things that are just going to happen certain places because of structure. What I do think, seeing the level of activity that parents have at PAUSD after doing childcare and the PTA and all that, and hearing from the PTA tonight, it's obvious in our community that once it's offered, it actually causes a spike in this. And the great thing about this is we're not asking anybody to commit to a long-term thing. We're just saying, let's do 6 months. Let's try. This is not a long-term initiative. This is just, let's kick the can down the road, see what happens, come back, and iterate on it. Whether we say, to your point, we might say, you know what? Childcare wasn't the button. It might be we need to do change of locations, or childcare is part of it, but we might need to add change of location and childcare. So I think we don't get to that answer until we try it.
And can I ask you about, you mentioned that items 2 through 5 are too focused. Can you help me think through that? So, when I put together this, when we put together this proposal, it's all advisory to the council, and obviously staff is going to look into it. These are some of the thoughts that have surfaced to my mind, but in the process of staff looking into it further, they may find that these items are not doable for one reason or another, or maybe it's not grade crossing, but it's zoning changes or something else. So in the process of staff doing its work, they may find that these suggestions are not the best approach, but these are certainly the ones that have surfaced to my mind, and I don't think we should be afraid to the extent that we know or have preferences as to what the pilot should look like, offer those up. But obviously, these are all just recommendations and advisory to the council. They may delete some, add some, and then when staff looks into it, they may discover they're doable, not doable. There may be other things that we just don't know enough about, so.
Commissioner Regier.
I agree that the discussion about, this is an assumption that grade crossing, and I would prefer it's too specific because it kind of dilutes the whole plan. That's my thought, is that when this county planning department had the discussion about Stanford, the whole city council chambers were full, and they had no childcare. Lots of people showed up. And I think that putting specific areas there, I would not endorse something like this because I think it's too specific.
Again, those were just based on my sense of what some of the big issues are, so I'd be happy to discuss that further, whether we want other specifics or just take them out at the discretion.
And I also want to say that I think that it's good that you showed different cities, but I think one of the parts that I've felt lacking in Palo Alto is before I moved here, I always thought Palo Alto was a leader, not a follower. And I think that I want us to be leaders again. And I don't think any more I just think that we should take this and go with it for what our community wants and needs and be leaders for once.
So if I can just sum up, the discussion has been talking about the specifics of the recommendation, and the idea that a recommendation could be broader without specifics, but keeping the pilot aspect of it. Is that fair to say?
I think Chair, you've summed it best. Commissioner Lee, I would say this. If I was sitting on the other side of the desk and I received this as somebody in the city planner's office, I would assume the tone was, I don't want to say dictatorial. It's like we're saying, okay, do this program around these issues, and that's how I'm just trying to read it from a couple of different perspectives.
Well,
I think in reality, even if we could just pull it up one, sorry.
Yeah.
Even if we did something as simple as, community suggested meetings that I would put any other community meetings designated by mayor or city manager or city council. Then I say, these are some community suggestions we have received that we should look into. And I think if we do just flip the language, I think it becomes more partnership and more, let's work on this together, not these are what we should work through.
I'm happy to make those changes. Again, I view it as these are recommendations we recommend, and our charge says recommend local action. So at times it may feel dictatorial, but it's all advisory. But I'm happy to, me and Valerie have talked about this a lot in terms of how do we soften the language. So and I'm trying to bring up
How open are you to working on a communication?
I can do emails, yes.
Sorry. I also have a question because some of those implementation has nothing to do with childcare. And that the city's doing. Like, for example, I would be more comfortable saying allowing speakers with kids to speak first. That would be, I would see the agenda, and B, that would just be a nice courtesy for every meeting that the city holds. It really doesn't have anything to do with childcare.
Yeah.
And I think that could be implemented even sooner without the pilot, which would be a good suggestion.
So if I have you right, you're saying that some of the thoughts are not linked to actually an outlay of money for childcare.
Right.
Slight shift.
Right, and there are other things in the manner of courtesy that would help families to be engaged as well. I mean, it does in effect. I remember one time I had to drive my children, who at the time I think were 10 and 5 down to San Jose for the Human Relations Commission meeting. And it was in a big cavernous meeting hall, and they were the only 2 present. And in the 3rd hour of the meeting, they were going bananas. I mean, it's just, in a sense, it does have something to do with childcare, right? I mean, because if you're thinking about children and their needs, right? I mean, they certainly don't need to be at a meeting for a long period of time if they can avoid it. Past 8 o'clock, right? I mean, it's way past their bedtime. So in that sense, someone who comes with a speaker card that has children, in effect, it's caring for the child, but it doesn't mean an outlay of cash for counselors or somebody to be in a child care structure.
But,
Go ahead.
I think, oh, sorry. I really like the direction Commissioner's going in. I think if we were to rewrite it, I think there are things that we can move to the top that are just cultural suggestions that would make it easier for people with children to participate. Like just the allowing kids to speak first, meetings on weekends when there can be, agenda items, like not burying it. One of the tricks of politics is bury the important vote at the end of the meeting, because nobody will be there. But if you really want community to be engaged, these are, so we can give those recommendations. These are to start and to follow up. We would love to see, we'd love to try this pilot program to accelerate this process.
I think the syllogism that Stephen has used is that as the Human Relations Commission, we want to be sure that, people can take advantage of resources in our community and participate, because things that are discussed at these meetings affect these families, and we want them to have a voice, which I think is in keeping with the mission. I just want to ask, are there other commissioners on this side that would like to add to the discussion? Commissioner Shu?
After hearing lots of discussion since the beginning, I believe this is a good proposal. Also, clearly there's a community need. However, how we tackle it, that's a different story. Like we were discussing, too specific, how to present the proposal to the council to get it rolling. I think some suggestion from Commissioner Smith, I think all sounds great. I think we should revise a little bit. So also,
is that something that you think is going to require a meeting, another meeting, or do you think it's something that can be done in the process of, let's say, a motion for this, that it be revised to take out specifics into? I mean, how detailed?
Probably should not be done detail for initial. A motion should be okay. I don't envision to have another detailed discussion meeting. That would drag too long for this kind of.
Yeah, because Commissioner Savage has indicated, well, maybe this isn't ready for prime time now. Is this okay with you if we move forward on some kind of a motion?
Yes.
Okay. And Commissioner Savage or Commissioner Stinger, any further discussion?
well, I think, I would like to hold, we have to, I believe, consider the priorities of city council before we throw this at them. And, I think it needs to be fleshed out a little more, funding, training of child care workers, especially if their children's are special needs. I think there's just a lot more work and study that needs to go into it before it can go any further out of this commission.
So let me just ask a question about that. That's an interesting point. When someone goes to the council and says, we've identified this priority of child care, and we would like you to consider working with us and moving forward with this particular issue, how does that differ from what you're saying? In other words, they would assign somebody, I suppose, to work with the people in the work plan.
Well, I don't
and
know. I don't know
come
what they would
up
do,
with a
you know.
recommendation.
And I don't mean to diminish the importance of having childcare. You know, I'd love to see greater participation in meetings. I'm just not sure it comes, you know, I mean, without getting further into the discussion, I'm not sure this is something that would come from the HRC. You know, I have many reservations about it.
Well, let's take Commissioner Smith first. He's got his light on. Go ahead.
Okay, so a couple of things. I think if to respond to the chair's question, I think there does need to be, I think this is a valid thing. I think, as I've always stated before, we're the canary in the coal mine. Our job is to be the ones that bring issues to those on the council that could be that could be of importance of community. I think that's what the Human Relations Commission is. I also think the challenges around childcare and the challenges around civic engagement is a human relation issue. So if this is the solution if this is a possible tactic to address it, I think that is. I do agree with Commissioner Zhu, though, and Commissioner Savage. I do think we're not all the way there. I would feel uncomfortable not doing a rewrite and not having one more discussion about it. I would feel uncomfortable sending it out because I do think there's some language, there's some contextual stuff, there might be some other stuff that we can highlight, there might be some innovative thinking that we could bring to it. But I do think this is something super valid that we do. I just think we're 80% of the way there. I think we have some refinement to do.
Can I make an observation of staff? So I would agree with Commissioner Smith. I think there's still, as staff, I see some questions to be asked. I mean, a lot of the examples, it makes assumptions of the use of city staff members' times and of ways of working with children. You know, I think it'd be helpful for the commission to have conversations with those who work with children in the community to get suggestions from them. And I'm not suggesting that you work the whole thing out before, if it's the will of the commission to make a recommendation to council. But as I observe the conversation, I still think there's some questions that need to be asked. I think looking at what you're really saying regarding child care as a need for child care during the day, or child care / child sitting for meetings during the night. Those are two, very different issues, and the type of care has some overlaps with the type of care is quite different because of the ages of the children that would be there. So I would, and I'm also, concerned that, the HRC, I do hear that, and I agree that the HRC needs to bring issues before the council that they feel like the council needs to hear. But I do believe in that due diligence before the council. You don't have the ability to bring a new issue to the council every month, every couple months, but to really say, yes, the HRC has really thought this through. We've looked at different models. We've talked to people locally in Palo Alto, and this is the best thinking of the group. Does that mean a 12-month study? Of course not. Does that mean a 3-month study? I'm not saying that either, but I think there's some questions that the folks around the table and just me who works on issues of childcare and who works, with the city's childcare advisory committee and works closely with my colleagues in recreation. I think those are some folks who can provide some insight. So if and when this goes to council, and if council says, did you ask these, what they might consider to be basic questions, and it's no, and at this point it would be no, but it works elsewhere. We thought it'd be a good idea here. And no one's saying it's not a good idea, but I just want just for the sake of the HRC wants you to do just the due diligence that you feel like needs to happen.
I like your concept, and let me just try to rephrase it a little bit. You know, the council review of our recommendations, I think, is going to ask some questions that have been raised here, and we need to have the answers for them. My reaction to this initially is it's a great idea, but I'm a little bit concerned that the parents who have asked for childcare help are not really interested at all in coming to a city council meeting. No offense to the city council, but
They may be watching it on TV.
right. But you know what I'm saying is that I don't know that parents with children, you know, especially children with special needs, are worried so much about that, more than they're worried about, for example, giving themselves a little break and
Respite
allowing,
care.
yeah, you know, caring for the caregiver. And you know, the one thing that I would say is that this is actually, it needs some work, but probably not a lot. But I would feel more comfortable with a broader child care recommendation, because I think we've heard in the context of our work plan some really compelling needs. And you know, I do think that people, you know, if they get child care, they might show up at meetings. But that's also a little bit different than child care. You know, that's kind of the focus on members of the community, for example, adults who want to participate, and giving them a break with child care so they can go out and participate. And I think, you know, this is really a great module. And, you know, one of the reasons I really wanted Steve to bring this up in this context is this discussion. I think it's a very helpful discussion to have and to talk through, you know, what is it that would make our recommendation a strong recommendation? Because to me, it's covering the issue that we're supposed to cover when we listen to some real families in need who don't have access to the Enjoy program, or don't have access to things like, you know, being able to go swimming because they can't get their kid changed in a locker room.
On that point, it would be helpful. Could we just, I pulled up an extra slide here. Could we go through the various questions that this body would like sort of answered that would make this body feel comfortable making some sort of recommendations, just so that we have some more guidance in terms of what are the things that we need to look into?
Could I finish one more thing? I know that when, after our retreat, and I wasn't at the city council meeting, so I can't, so I'm really paraphrasing Lydia, but I know after Lydia heard about the issues about the Joy catalog from the parents, she did go in front of the city council as a city council member, and the first thing that the manager wanted to know is, how do you know it's going to cost this? How do you know? And they didn't have any discussion, and that's my point about, I think
Costs, though, are something that.
well, no,
very
but let
difficult
me
for us
finish,
to-
let me finish, Stephen. Is I think that the question I would like our city council liaison to be here when we have a discussion about something that we're asking the city council to do, because that's, liaison might have more information and more questions that he wants, you know, or she, if it's, you know, so I guess that's my question.
So,
What do we need,
so
what do they want from us?
I think action item number 1 is probably to, what did you call it, the child care?
Yeah. Yeah, I want to be really cautious that the Child Care Commission has been commissioned by the city manager to work on child care issues in the community. Child care at city meetings is not one of their things, but I don't want to recreate the work that they're already doing. But there is it's called the Early Care and Education Committee.
So I think there is a body here that might not be working on the exact thing, but is digging from the same group of data to come up with actions in other areas for the city.
They have recently completed an assessment of the needs of families with young children in the community. They did multiple focus groups. This issue did not come up, but I I will be honest, as you all know, sometimes it's in the phrasing of the questions while certain things came up. Other issues came up, and at one point that group, if you'd like, can just share their wisdom with you, but
Okay.
that didn't
So,
come up.
so at least knowing what other childcare things are, what other things are happening in community, I think is one of the first steps. Maybe getting with staff and saying, what are the other what are the other child care initiatives, even if they don't match up, because to Patty's point, you don't want to stand up in front of, make a recommendation, and then somebody asks the question, what are the other people doing? And you'd be like, well, no, we just came up with this in a vacuum. So I think that's one. I think,
Does that,
yes.
okay.
I think number two, what was the second thing? Why am I drawing a blank? Number two was there's two separate things that are happening in there. There are cultural things that cost no money to do that can improve meetings. Like the ones that, and these just can be recommendations,
But we don't know that they're not already happening, so
That's why
investigating.
that's why
Correct.
that's number one. That's why we're saying, is this something that's happening? Childcare initiatives, whatever, or for parents. And then number three is probably coming up with a language that is a little bit more collegial, a little bit more focused on iteration and working in the community.
Can you elaborate on iteration?
So,
Well, I think one of the things is that Minka has pointed out that there are resources in the city employees that may be, considering this issue. And maybe that's something, instead of making requests in the vacuum, figure out, who is the receptive audience on the other side.
So this is something that I struggle with. It's sort of an interesting chicken and the egg situation where, as a commission, we don't have the ability to direct or captivate staff time unless they're interested in doing it. So, in the past, there have been things that we've had questions about, but because staff is understandably overworked and otherwise prioritized, we're not able to get to either the people or to the answers to the basic questions we have, which is why my approach, generally speaking, has shifted one towards we sort of come up with what we are interested in working on, and if it needs more work, more work from staff, we need to ask council for that ask, because I've been somewhat frustrated with my inability to get answers to some questions that might help us develop a more fleshed out and specific recommendation. And those things may end up taking 6 months to a year to just get access to that person or answers to some of those questions, let alone putting together the proposal.
Yeah, I think
So
one of the things that we did is as a group, we met and we established our work plan and our priorities, and all that information is known to staff. And, one of the reasons why I encouraged this presentation is because now staff knows, kind of where we're headed and why we might need to, interact with someone in the city that has this responsibility, or other groups that have been charged with similar responsibilities. And so now I think that opens it up, and we've had a discussion, and hopefully those roadblocks you've identified will get better.
I mean, we've had items sort of as official commission items, but again, without council direction, we can't command staff time if they are otherwise prioritized. I mean, that's just a reality, and it's unfortunate. It's frustrating, but if that's the system that we have to operate in, I've been trying to operate within that system. Right?
Commissioner Smith. Yeah.
all right, two things. If we go back to slide number 12. See, I know, but it's just because you had 2, 3, 4, and 5 could be listed as suggestions or areas that we've heard in community dialogue, instead of these are that. The other thing I will say is, I don't know if this is the right time, but okay, I don't care. We have a weird tension, right? Where early on in my time here, we had the tension of are we overstepping our bounds as a commission? And and are we demanding too much from people, X, Y, Z? And I think the group resolution was work it through the commission and hand it over to city council. Was that not like, I think, sort of?
Which group, what resolution?
No, I just think, I'm just asking a question. I'm just asking a question because I'm listening to you and I hear what you're saying and I'm just trying to process it in my own mind. So for me, I think the process for us is to do the footwork, talk to people as best we can, and hand the ball over early in the process so that the other voices can get to the table instead of trying to get the voices to the table, because we don't have that oversight or jurisdiction, or you feel what I'm saying?
I mean, for example, on CDA, one of the council members who's since termed off, she had indicated that she would have liked to have seen it earlier. And you know, in that case, there's still a lot of detailed TBD by staff because those questions could only be answered by staff. And so, you know, I've heard similar things from other council members. Again, it's anecdotal, but you know, to the extent, it seems to me that they don't want us spending so much time overthinking things and delaying the process, because ultimately a lot of it's going to be changed either by council or through the investigative process that staff does when they're directed to do so by council.
I think there's the fine line between working out all the details, which is, you know, not really the role of the HRC, but just thinking, kind of going back, like when I do a presentation at council, half the time I spent, okay, what do I think they're going to ask me? And I have this whole sheet of notes of what do I think they're going to ask me on this aspect of it. And when I saw this, there were several questions that just popped into my head that don't take that, like if you would have, you know, talked to me about it, I would have said, well, what about blah, 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 blah. There would have been some questions, and then I could say, do you know about X, Y, and Z? So there's this difference between, yes, you do not command staff time, but just what are some of the basic questions? The thing that came up to me is, well, who, you know, is this a problem locally? Who have you talked to locally? And that's what they get into. I have been in front of council other times when I bring up examples of other cities only to be asked, yes, but. So I'm kind of attuned to those type of questions. And like I said, in the end, I want, when the HRC brings up something to the council, that it's not like, oh, there's the HRC again, and they didn't blah, blah, blah. I want them to say, oh, the HRC is bringing something to us. I know it's well thought through. Let's listen to what they have to say.
But do we have a sense as to, again, this would be perfect for our discussion with council, to what extent do they want us to, in answering, is this problem local? Do they want us to conduct a survey every time we do things, or is it based on what we're hearing on the ground as residents? Again, it's a process, philosophical approach that I think we need some further guidance. You know, my sense is that this is a local problem. I mean, the fact that we've seen it in other communities is illustrative of what we could do, but I see it as a local issue. But is that enough for the current council? Is that sufficient? Or would they like us to do 6 months of surveying folks, either, you know?
I think the hard part about the study session is because they, just as with the HRC discussion, they will respond as individual members.
Yeah.
It's not, you know, as the council, we would like you to do X, and that's a struggle with the study
And
session.
so, I mean, we continue to have these discussions both at commission and council, and so it's really going to come down to our individual preferences as a body. You know, I might be in the minority in terms of what I think the process should be, and if that's the case, then sure, we'll do it another way. But
Commissioner Savage.
Oh, okay, well, I just see this discussion going round and round, and we could discuss this all night, probably. But since it's been more than an hour, I suggest we come to some kind of resolution and move on.
could we get some other
Well,
other
I was
questions?
doing
to
my
that?
best to keep track of time.
Oh,
and,
I didn't mean to intrude on you.
I realize you have an item that is coming up. One of the things that I think is important is that we do have an active discussion. If you If you have no further thoughts, and none of the other commissioners have none,
I have one last thought.
okay, let's give it last thought, okay?
I thank you again for some very sage wisdom. I think we have the answer in front of us. Just go to the PTA. The lady from the PTA came and gave the comments tonight. Call her and say, let's meet all the head of the PTA, the Parent Teachers Association in Palo Alto, or as many of them, and see if this is something that really makes sense. Because those are your most proactive, civic-minded individuals in the schools anyway. They'll end up being the people that will take advantage of this stuff when we do it on a city level.
Well,
Just one final thought, if that's okay.
well, I have another thought now.
Just-
I was
we gotta
wondering,
have to limit
I know,
discussion.
but I think that's micromanaging about, but I was wondering, what is our role within our liaisons for the city council? Couldn't, if we decided this childcare was important, that before we present it to city councils, maybe each of us should contact our, because, what is the point of having, no, it's not.
Oh, and also some of the council
No,
members.
can I finish?
Sorry, go ahead.
It's not a Brown Act. We are liaisons, and we have the right to talk to city council member.
No, you're talking about, because you have a city council buddy, is that what you're talking about? Or
Aren't
are
they
you
called
talking about the
liaison?
liaison that comes here?
We have both. We're a buddy, I guess, let's just say.
Yeah,
And we could talk to our own buddy about whatever issues we want.
yeah, one of the things that's happening is this next item, and that's why I want to get to it, which is, we are going to have a study session with city council. So if there's no objection, I'm going to close the discussion on this item, and I'm going to ask Commissioner Stinger and Regier.
Can we get some final direction from the commission?
No,
on
in
this?
Savage, right.
Could we get some direction from the commission on this item?
Yeah, I think we're just going to close the discussion without a motion. And I think,
I'll make a motion. I want to move that the four action items that are described based on our discussion that are currently on the screen, get with staff, what are some of the cultural challenges, more collegial language, and meet with PTA to get local things be investigated by the commissioners that are
on the work plan item.
on the work plan item to be reported back out for the next meeting.
Is there a second for that motion? We have a second. Is there any further discussion? Yeah, go ahead.
I would like to add to one, get with staff to identify what the other child care initiatives are being considered, and what are the items of due diligence we need to
Good point.
incorporate into our motion.
Okay, and the amended motion, do we have a second? I'll
Yeah,
second it. Yeah, okay. And any other further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 That's, any against? No, it's unanimous. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Okay,
very
we'll move on to and thank you, Commissioner Savage, for riling us up to get us moving. I was on my cell phone arranging for childcare. Well, yeah, my son is at an activity until 9 o'clock usually, and it's usually me that picks him up. So we do have childcare. I have good news for the commission. All right, so at our last meeting, we talked a little bit about this joint study session, and one of the things that I felt is, being a new chair, that I did not have a wealth of experience on sort of the interactions with council. And I asked if former chairs, Stinger and Savage, would come to this meeting. And I said that if someone objected and felt hurt that I didn't show up, or Commissioner Shu didn't show up, that of course we'd be glad to come and say hello. But the idea is that we want to borrow from a history of interactions. You know, one of the more difficult things is to understand temperament, to understand, you know, one's place in the world. And I think that this is a very good idea. um, But if someone in the city council, feels agita, I'm of course willing to say hi. But, and I see here that the commissioners have put together a very nice slideshow about this meeting. They're very well prepared, as always. And I think they've taken the highlights from our work plan and they can represent us well. I think you'll notice also in the work plan, in terms of communications, that they are on the work plan as communicating about the HRC and raising awareness of the HRC in those work plans items. An example of which is the vaping letter, which Commissioners Savage and Stinger helped draft with Commissioner Lee to provide some input on how best to approach the City Council on an item that really concerns us. And so we're going to ask them to begin this presentation.
I have a question before you start. Just to clarify, on the 21st, it will only be these two commissioners?
That's right.
No, we were expecting.
All of us?
Okay, that's.
Study session is
Yeah, because
always
the way
all
you
the
said it.
commissioners.
I thought I got out of it.
No.
No. Were we going to show up to our own work? Oh.
I was like,
Oh, you really want to come too? Okay.
I can't. This is gonna be interesting.
Okay. All right.
The only thing we did was to meet with the,
I thought only 2 people were allowed to go.
oh no,
Not that easy.
that would be.
Okay. Well, then my excitement is higher now. I just thought.
Chair, you're
Hey.
gonna have to do childcare for that night.
Yeah, I guess so.
Or bring along.
Okay. Well, glad you clarified that, because October 21st I was headed for somewhere else. Okay, we'll cancel the trip to Vancouver. Yeah. Anyway, but I do think that having our former chairs provide the continuity of their wisdom and how to approach council and how to frame issues is very important. Because I think, in my mind, I do think that the things that we do are very important, but I want them to get the best framework going up to the council. So,
Commissioner Kralik, my one tension with that approach is that you don't give other commissioners knowledge. And we're grateful for the service of our 2 former chair people, but you don't set up anybody else to understand what that interaction is.
well, that's why we're having this meeting.
No, but yeah.
And they're
but-
going to present exactly what they're going to say, so you do have the knowledge. But yeah, just
no,
Yeah,
but there's a difference between a presentation and the inner workings. And I don't want to do it, but whether it's Patty or Steve or you, somebody that isn't a former chair should actually be engaged in this dialogue to understand. So you said it yourself. You said, as being a new chair, I was trying to understand temperament and this and that, and that knowledge doesn't go to somebody else. That's just my only thing in the beginning. It's not that I'm against any. It's just that I think there needs to be probably another person just as an understudy to get the information.
okay. Well, we were at the last meeting, and this is the approach we took. So let's give it to the leaders of this discussion. Go right ahead, please.
Microphone, Commissioner, thank you.
First, well, here, I'll go ahead. The mayor and vice mayor were very enthusiastic to meet with us, I will tell you. I have been at some of these meetings before, and the level of engagement was much higher than I've seen, and that was a really encouraging, optimistic note. Wouldn't you agree?
Right. So just to interject for the 2 commissioners that weren't here, it's normal practice for the chair and the vice chair to meet with the mayor and the vice mayor to give them a preview of what to expect from a commission at their study session. So at the last meeting, the chair elected the 2 former chairs to meet on the commission's behalf. So that meeting has already taken place, and they already went over, what they could expect to the conversation that they could expect to hear from the commission, and that's what Commissioner Savage is
Okay,
speaking
so
about.
thanks for clarifying, because I thought that they were meeting with the chair or the mayor and the vice mayor by themselves, and they did.
Yes.
Okay, so then I'm recalibrated. So that meeting's occurred, and now we're going to have a separate meeting, which
Correct.
is the,
With the entire city council, whoever is there, and that's with the entire HRC. And that's
Okay.
what these two former chairs are gonna speak to you about now.
Right. But- And before we get involved, I have to tell you, and this came up months ago, I am out of town on that day, unfortunately. I let them know that as well. But that did not interfere with our conversation and moving forward. Right?
No, yes, you're right. No, it didn't. And so what we have is a fairly standard template of
Yeah.
a study session. And we thought we would go through that for dialogue, and we would like the whole commission, or at least 6/7 of it, to present the slides. And I will make some suggestions as we go through which slides we'd like each person to present. We don't think we need to go over each word for word, but there are some intents that we want to make with each slide. So Gabe, we would ask you to do the introduction to the commission as an advisory body to the council. And we think this commission is particularly, yes, Patty?
What time is it?
I will
6
get,
o'clock.
it's 6 o'clock on the
I-
21st. I will get all that information
No,
to
I
you.
just thought it's important for,
okay, let's,
No, I
in the
just thought-
interest of time.
no, that's why I thought
Yeah, let's move,
it makes a difference if it's 6 or if it starts.
yeah. Go ahead, please.
Okay, I just wanted to point out that this is a particularly well-balanced commission, age, gender, race, ethnicity, and new and old, to Commissioner Smith's point. It has new and old, and that's, I think, really important. There are some commissions where don't have that new blood coming in.
Which slide are you on now?
I am,
She's just walking through the slides.
thank you.
She doesn't have to go through them all, she
Okay.
just walk through it.
Or as you go through, could I make a suggestion for slide 3 that we include the mandate in the code? Because I think the code explains in greater detail sort of what our mission are and what our tools are, and not a lot of council members.
You mean just this one, slide 3?
No, more than, I mean, this is the mission statement, but the municipal code has has bullet points as to what our mandate is and what our authority is, and I think it's important to include that, because not a lot of council members actually know what we can and cannot do, and so I'd like to include it in there. I mean, we don't have to recite it, but if we can include it in the materials for them, that would be good.
I think we wanted to keep it as simple as possible. If they have a lot to read, they're not going to listen to us as much.
Let me make a suggestion. Why don't you guys go through the whole presentation, and then we'll take comments one at a time from each commissioner. And that way, we'll move fast, okay?
Chief Fung, we would ask you to talk about the core responsibilities with regard to his rep.
Actually, I communicate with the chair and the staff, so I won't be here because I was traveling out of the country, so.
Oh, that would be difficult. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm happy to do that for the
Great.
vice
Sorry
chair.
about that.
And just for, in the sake of timing that night, we're just looking for folks to spend like a minute or two on each slide so that the majority of the time could be spent in dialogue. And to also let you know, for folks that have not been before, I sit in the audience, so this is all your show.
So Gabe, we were looking at his rep. The important point is to emphasize the number of agencies and the funding that we're responsible for. Commissioner Lee, are you going to be there on the 21st? Yay. We would ask you to do the core responsibility, the Community Development Block Grant. And again, the emphasis is on how much responsibility we have. And the Emerging Needs Fund, particular respect for the council in giving us that funding so that we can have the flexibility to fund new initiatives.
Right, and this was brought up by the vice mayor. He is particularly interested in it.
What part, the block grant?
Emergent
Yeah.
needs.
Emerging need.
Gabe, talk about the Palo Alto mediation program, and that we are liaisons to a number of organizations. We move from our core responsibilities to the accomplishments in the past year. And Commissioner Smith, if you could talk about the community forums and our civic engagement. And what we accomplished in the past, what we want to accomplish this year. We chose 4 or 5 areas. I will highlight them quickly. And then Patty, if you could talk, looking ahead into the additional areas of interest. And the emphasis here, we think, is on things that we want to explore. I can't remember if it was the mayor or the vice mayor asked us. So looking ahead, the additional areas of interest.
Wait, so Patty's doing both slides, is
I
that right?
was going to do the 4 or 5. I'm going to do the first looking ahead.
Oh, okay.
Pastor Smith will do community forums and civic engagement, the accomplishments that we had last year. I'll talk about some focus areas for this year. And then we wanted to focus on things that we're exploring and putting definition to. Okay. And then Gabe, if you could close and turn it back to the council to ask for
Input.
on.
Okay, very good. All right, are there any, let's take discussions from one, we'll go on that side first. Stephen, go right ahead, please.
Sorry, I appreciate the work that the former chairs put into this. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of work. From my perspective, I would recommend that we spend the bulk of the time really in dialogue with the council, because so infrequently do we have that opportunity. And so to the extent that we are sort of reciting things that we have done or what we do, I think would lend itself better to just having it in the informational packet. They may read it, they may not read it, but this is really an opportunity for us to have a discussion with them. And even though the council won't be voting on anything, we can get a sense based on what each individual says, what the mood of the council is and what their preferences are. And in particular, while it may be interesting to get their input on the major focus issues or areas, for me, it goes back to again, the question on process and how do they want us to go about addressing some of these issues, whether it's on our work plan or other issues they care about. How do they prefer that we look at those issues? What sort of work do they think it's appropriate for us to do? How do they want us to bring it to them? Because again, we keep having these discussions at the commission level as to what is the right way to do it. And I think that's going to continue to be an issue until we get some clarification from council, even though it's unofficial guidance. For instance, when we look at the mission statement, it talks about promoting awareness of issues and enabling conversations. I wasn't on the commission when the mission statement was created, and it's a fine mission statement, but it's just one aspect of all of the tools in our toolbox. The code talks about how we can recommend local legislation or other action to the council, right? That's a huge tool that I've been trying to push us to utilize more, in addition to promoting awareness and in addition to enabling conversations. And so I'd like to get some clarification from council as to how do we best be the policy advisors to them not just raising issues and doing community events, which are fantastic, but how do we more fully fulfill that hat that we haven't traditionally exercised as often?
Stephen, let me make a suggestion. You know, the second to last slide says HRC is seeking council's input on major focus areas. Maybe we can add just one point, and then you can, you know, I mean, you spoke so eloquently. I don't think we had to put it on a slide. Maybe just say we're seeking guidance from council on how the HRC can bring issues to council's attention and the process that HRC should follow. Okay?
We could add that to the slide, but if we could
Is the,
protect the
Yeah,
time a bit more.
but
so
keep
that-
in mind, you know, you have a full hour, and the slides shouldn't take, you know, I would give it 8 minutes, you know, to go through this, if
Yeah.
that much.
Yeah, I mean,
so let's add that point.
Yeah.
And then what you can do, I think, is you know, we'll reserve that point.
I mean, when we did the joint session, I mean, we did a joint session the first 6 months that I was on the commission, and a lot of the time was spent sort of on these types of things that are on the slide, and I would like us to try to reserve at least half the time for discussion on process.
I think that's because it's kind of, there's two things with human nature. I think people see this and they say, oh, I hate speaking in public, I'm going to do it really fast. And when they get there that night, some of that nervousness of being in front of council, what they were going to say in 1 minute, they ended up saying, each person says it in 3 to 5 minutes. So we have to, yeah. So I think just if people keep that into consideration, I think that will be helpful.
So I mean, I think we need to figure out, I mean, we can include all the slides, but if we can figure out which ones do we not need to have someone present on.
Well,
Let me
so that we
just
can do more discussion.
yeah,
again.
so
respond.
is
If I could
everybody okay with
respond.
this HRC is seeking guidance from council on process and raising issues?
That's great, I think.
So,
I just
so,
wanted to make a,
so Commissioner Lee had asked for a change earlier, which was to put the code on the
I didn't hear anybody say no. I think
no.
it's-
And it's a point. It's not. I'm not.
Yeah.
And I think that becomes more critical because then it frames the later discussion as far as process. Because what I've realized in dealing with people is we all have perception, and by even having that code somewhere in there, is that people can actually know and calibrate around that, because all organizations, all commissions, all boards have that. I think that's very critical, and I think maybe that should be the first question. How do you want the HRC process-wise to fulfill its mandate to you based on the code, not based on the history?
And
but
I
based-
like that thought because, you know, isn't that what we did in the retreat? Didn't we have that code up there?
Yeah.
And that framed our discussion. So I think that, I agree. I think that's really good. Commissioner Smith, other than that, is there any? Okay.
I love it.
Commissioner Bergier.
Okay, I have a couple of comments. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing. But and being that I'm speaking on the looking ahead, that slide, there's quite a few things that we discussed at the retreat. And I also know that that was one of their priorities. We're missing homelessness.
It's on the slide before, that's already there.
But, okay, so what's the difference?
The difference is the items on the page before are already items that have had some thought, or that the subcommittees for those have met and have developed some kind of ideas that are in front of the HRC or ready within the next couple months to be in front of the HRC. Some of these other items,
Okay, then I'll just finish. Then public safety's not on there. And which was also mine, many of the climate change. And that was something that the city was one of their priorities too, to discuss that, and that's not on there. And I would really like them to know
Would
that's
you-
looking ahead.
Yeah, would you defer to staff as to put it either in looking ahead, slide 1 or slide 2?
I think
Either.
it needs to be in
Slide
slide 2.
two, slide two.
Because that concept, I mean,
It's a
There- there's-
concept, it hasn't reached its fruition
Right.
in terms of the
And-
specifics.
Are we attaching the work plan to the packet?
No.
I would recommend that
I
we do so
don't
that they
think
can
it's,
see.
I don't think it's ready for them to see as far as having some.
I mean, we approved it, we approved the work
I
plan.
did, but I think some of the wording on it,
I mean,
that's up to you. I think some of the wording on it still isn't.
I mean, it's a work in progress, it's always
Can
gonna
I
be that way.
finish? Can I just,
so.
because it's my time? My other issue is this my question, I guess, is this a one-time, when do we meet once a year?
Once a year or once every couple years.
So my other issue is that one of the things that I haven't clicked out was to get the city to work on a pilot program for the child initiative that I was saying about the kid-friendly.
That's under children. That's under
Well-
the topic of children. On the next slide, I'm looking ahead.
Looking ahead, just children.
Right, that's under the topic of children.
Okay.
And that-
So will we have a discussion about that, or is it just?
I don't, because you only have an hour,
Right, that is.
the subcommittee felt, I'll let them answer that, there was just not an effective way to go over. You have 23 initiatives. And
Right.
the idea was to highlight some and to give the topic name of others that say, we are concerned for these vulnerable populations as well. There are members of the commission who are actively working on bringing ideas in the next several months or during this year on these topics.
And I think that's very effective. That's a good way to frame it, because that does, in fact, get council to think about their priorities and communicate to us which ones they think are important. I think that's very good input, Nika. Thank you.
So my question is then is CEDA, where does that fit in?
Gender equity.
So that means looking ahead is really additional areas of interest? Wasn't that already, it doesn't seem like, that seems like the.
I think,
You know what I'm saying? It just seems like that's been a question for city council to be put on their agenda. Not this time, I'm new, so how long has it been?
So maybe that's the question we add in slide 10 is what is the status update on CDOT? Why has it been postponed again?
Or even looking ahead, 2019, putting it exactly on slide 2.
Well, I think to Patty's point, this is something, CDOT is something that the commission has already acted on and it's waiting for council action on.
So to
So
me,
it's
that
not
should,
really looking ahead, it's looking, give us an update on things we've done in the
well,
past.
it's looking ahead in regards to what are you guys gonna do? Right.
but this is what the HRC is working on, not what
But-
what you want to see what council is working on.
Well,
But,
and
so-
that's Patty's point.
Point.
is We should have a
Yeah.
slide about, these are things we've done in the past that are waiting for city action,
What's gonna happen?
what's gonna happen.
Because this is
May-
just I guess my concern is what is the point of this meeting that we're getting together? Because, and I don't wanna,
No, that,
Can I make a suggestion on this slide number 10? In addition to say we're seeking council's input on major focus areas, before that say HRC is seeking updates from council on prior recommendations and/or issues. And then you can list whatever issues.
Right.
I would recommend not doing that, and I'll tell you why. You're mixing two different things. You're asking for direction on process and future with attention point. So if you're going to do that just strategically in a meeting, I would probably put that at an earlier slide. So,
right.
as its own thing, so that when you get to that, you're not mixing your future and your past, and it's just
Right.
I think presentation-wise not as clean.
Okay. Often what I've seen at these meetings is everybody gets a chance to speak or say whatever they want.
You mean the council members?
Well, no, I mean, the council members often ask, Commissioner Regier, what have you been working on, or what? I mean, they give everybody. Well, actually, it doesn't happen all the time, but it's happened often where they give everybody a chance to speak. And at that point, you can bring up your own concerns, your pet projects, whatever.
Okay,
I
so Commissioner Smith,
Yeah, thank
are
you.
you saying that we should not
I
add the?
I think we should add
items?
a separate slide because the reality is that as volunteers, we came together, we put CEDA out, it went to the thing, it's been pushed back several times. They might have a legitimate reason, but I think if you're going to say, this is all the work we're doing, you know, and this is what we've done and accomplished in the past, and we're still waiting on this, it's still a tension point, and it's almost like an elephant in the room. Somebody's waiting for it to come
What's
out.
our solution here?
Well, our solution is to ask them, where do you really stand on this? It's an honest question.
Are there other issues besides CDOG?
I think that's the only one I can think of at
Well,
this moment.
vaping is, it'd be interesting to know when they're going to agendize
No,
vaping.
no, it hasn't been
I mean, but we
introduced.
took our action at the last meeting,
No,
so.
no.
My suggestion
No.
might be, this was in continuing work. I can mention that part of the LGBTQ summit was part of a package which included CEDAW, and we do have a question about where that is
I think that's a good place to put it. I like, but this is, I like where it's, I'm about to call it, I feel like I'm in
I
church.
think it should be its own slide.
I don't,
think we should mix it in.
No, I think it's a valid, it fits the category, and what we don't want to do is.
Highlight such a big deal about tension.
Yeah, if we don't want to spend 45 minutes talking about, it's important, but we only have one opportunity in front of this group, so we want to also focus on some other areas that are
Let me
critical.
just ask a point of order, if I could, Commissioners Lee and Smith and Regier. We have heard from each of you, at least your initial comments. I have not heard from Commissioner Shu, and also Commissioner Stinger and Commissioner Savage,
So can I just finish? I mean,
or myself.
okay,
So-
I just wanted to make sure that looking ahead,
Okay,
that how do we feel about putting the climate change issue and the police,
public safety.
public safety?
I put them down. I was going to make those revisions.
I just want to make sure that, okay, thank you.
all right. Okay, so Commissioner Shu.
Thank you. So really appreciate such wonderful preparation. When I looked through this back slides, I was trying to speak out even earlier. You know, my focus was the last 3 slides. Looking forward, looking ahead. So basically, you know, the slide number 8, 9, and 10. That's where we should, as a commission, should focus on. You know, whatever we did, sure, we should speak very briefly to inform the council members, you know, the achievement. However, we are going there to talk, discuss with the council to get some input, calibration, and we learn their expectation. We can prioritize what we are planning to do. We got lots of activities, issues, right? So we identified 23. Can we get all of them done? So based on their input, maybe we could rediscuss, focus on some of the issues, get the work done more effectively. That's my comments. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Savage. Any further comments?
Me?
Yeah.
No, but the issue of vaping was talked about a lot. So that's something they are aware of, concerned with, and you know, are looking to us for some information.
I
mean,
think,
just
as far as I know,
clarification
that the letter is done, right? And I'm
Right.
to sign the letter. Is
But-
that right?
That's correct. I'm working on some formatting issue that got a little funky in the, but you should
I'm
have
available
that-
for a coffee tomorrow whenever you
Yeah,
want me to sign
so
it.
as soon as I have it, it should be done tomorrow for you to sign.
That's wonderful. And I think it is, so that will come up. But, you know, one of the things that it said in the letter was that we had, and it's so funny because when I read it, I'm like, did I really do this at the last meeting? Set up some kind of a subcommittee to do further work on vaping? Did we do that?
You did,
Okay. And I'm on it. Holy mackerel,
And
here we go again.
But we
for
also
you.
had a very specific ask for council. So while the commission will continue working on it, there's still action for the council. And so my hope would be that at some point they agendize the recommendation that we made at the last meeting. And to the extent that by the time they get to it, we have additional things, sure. But let's be clear, the motion did ask them to prioritize it and direct staff to work with us and other stakeholders. So while we do our work independently, there's still an ask that's pending with council.
Okay, I'd like to come back to this presentation and to two comments. Your question, Commissioner Regier, was right on, what is our point? And I think it is at a strategic level, where are we headed and how can we best help them? So I've added in the edits that you made, and we want to go through them, and this is to your point, Commissioner Lee, quickly. We have an hour. We should spend maybe 10 minutes on the slides, and so each of us should take that point really to heart and time ourselves with your help, Commissioner Smith, with the input, the iPad timer, the ding, so that we get through it. And at the review session, I did ask your questions. I said that these would be questions that would be coming from us. So we incorporated that into the discussion. I think that we can, with the foundation, to show that we've done, that we know what we're doing and we have some evidence of past performance and ideas for this year, we can then ask them to help give us some guidance on top of that. Layer that on top of what we've accomplished.
I have a comment, if I can. It goes into the looking ahead section. And while I realize we have the specifics of youth vaping, I think the work plan item that I offered was public health. And the idea behind that was there are other communities that have public health officers. And Berkeley is one of them. I can't think of, there's another one that's local that also has that. And that's something that's absent, you know, and, you know, one of the reasons that vaping came up was the issue of public health. So, I mean, I can sense Commissioner Lee's concern. I had it at the last meeting. Since our last meeting, there have been hundreds more cases of lung disease. And there's been another, I think it's like 15 more deaths. There's also, there's deaths that have occurred in teenagers. There's deaths that have occurred for people that just smoke non-THC products, some that smoke THC products. But, you know, as a parent, and I have young children, I know that young children will try things. And I certainly don't want that experience to lead to death. That's a problem, or to lead to permanent lung issues. And that's where we find ourselves. There's nobody that knows what's going on with that. And so I think, you know, one of the things that I want, one of the reasons I want to put public health there is I do think that having knowledgeable public health people on our staff as a city is an important thing. You know, how do we feel about vaping when a third of high school students vaped in the last month? When you have, you know, this 1,000 cases of lung disease, 23 deaths hitting 49 states, and this is not somebody who's like chain smoking for 30 years. This is a teenager, 17 years old, that recently died. And that's troublesome to me. And, you know, when I go over to Mountain View and get gas next to my kid's school, as big as one of these windows is, you know, Juul's, you know, products. And I just think to myself, okay, imagine if this were like Tylenol, you know, and you had 23 deaths in 49 states and 1,000 cases of serious lung illness. You know, we're in a situation where there's been a vacuum of leadership in the federal government, and you know, my reaction to this is we need public health here. We need to make some decisions here because others aren't making those decisions. So that's my way of, saying, and I'll be frank, the last meeting, when I heard that presentation, I said, I want our city council members to get off their butts and do something about this, and maybe that's not the right temperament to have.
Oh, it is.
But I will tell you that people are scared, and people in schools are just caught off balance. They don't know how to deal with this situation.
But, well,
And I think public health is a pretty critical item that we're all facing.
can I just ask a question in regards to process? Who is chairing the meeting, and who's setting the agenda?
The city council, the mayor will be leading the meeting, and he will turn it over to the chair of the HRC.
And who's, okay.
And then after that, the mayor will be running the meeting and calling upon council members who want to engage with the HRC. It is their meeting. It is a joint meeting, but they will be leading it.
Sorry for the long discussion, but public health is the issue.
If I put youth vaping,
No, in
slash
looking ahead, under
oh,
one of
okay.
these, just put public health. I think it's a broader issue than vaping, and that's how vaping came up, but there's broader issues.
I will let you know that this presentation will be reviewed internally by the city, so there could be things that look a little different. So it goes through my manager and the city manager. They review all presentations that go to council, so.
So why would they need to modify our presentation? These are things
I'm
that
not
we
sure
are
that they
doing.
will. They might think that something might, there's too much on a slide or something like this, but, I'll just say that they will be looking at it. I mean, if it's anything, usually it comes back exactly the same, but, the city manager runs he runs the business of the city.
But this isn't a staff presentation, though, right? This is a commission
I hear
presentation.
you, but it's still all presentations that go. I'm not saying that it'll make any changes. If you'd like to bring that up
I
in
mean, I have an
another
issue with
forum.
that in concept. I'm sure it won't happen, but in theory, I have
Okay,
huge issues.
I have to move the meeting
Okay,
along.
but I just have one point, I'm sorry.
Okay,
I
hold on
feel-
before you give the point. I just want to make sure everyone on this side of the table, are we through our comments, because I am. Yes,
Okay.
so now we'll turn to the
Okay,
second
my
set.
point is that even though I really truly agree with you about public health being on here, but we never, as a commission, in our plans in the retreat, put that.
I
And
think it is.
I was looking under
It
this,
is,
She has her sheet.
I have my sheet.
She has it from there.
No, it's definitely there. Page 4 is public health. It's identified as an initiative.
And I lumped them together because
Maybe
this
my
was
page,
under
oh, I'm missing that
public health.
page.
So
That's it.
why I thought I had,
It's the
I'm
old
missing that
missing page 4
It
public.
is, page 4. Okay, that is my only point, is that I didn't want any
Feel
more.
better now?
No, I feel dumb more than better.
No, but I think that's a valid question, because we have to be disciplined in what we stick to.
Mhm.
Thank you for bringing that up, Ken.
Yeah.
my question is, homelessness, it is important, and it's looking, that didn't come out right. It is a major focus. I took words from our work plan, but, I need help from the leads, Commissioners Lee and Laguerre. Should that question come up, exactly how we.
So right now, it's listed in the looking ahead slide 1.
So it's a major focus.
As a
and-
major initiative, it has goals of collaborative approaches and projects that are identifying best practices and building liaisons in
so,
the
well,
county.
let me know if this helps. So we could say on our November agenda, we have folks from the Office of Supportive Housing coming from the county to give us an update on the numbers of homeless in our community, as well as not thoughts, but what other communities are doing to address it.
As long as we are in the initial stages of a study session, or a study that.
Right.
It's
There's-
specific, I was
and
just
have
looking
more
for specific.
I have another that I was gonna bring up at my commission meeting, but my point too is that are we dealing, I thought it was going to be unhoused. People can be,
Yeah, when I say homeless, I mean unhoused.
but I think there's a difference.
And a house includes people living on the streets, living in RVs, anything that's not permanent housing.
Right.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, we use homelessness as a colloquial for unhoused. At least I do.
So,
Okay.
I don't
I
think
just took it from the
I don't
work
think-
plan. Tell me
Yeah,
if you want to change the work plan, I will change it here.
All right.
Okay, so we have
I
to
think
wrap
we
this
covered
up.
it. I think we covered it all.
Yep.
I have a motion though.
Yes, please make a motion.
I'd like to move that we include as an attachment the work plan, that we include a slide with the municipal code about the HRC, and that we include a slide with, at the end with the questions that we have about process. And any other questions that may have come up.
And just to clarify the motion, what we had talked about
But
was
this
on
process
slide
is
10
what
on
is that what you're saying
process, seeking guidance from council on process and raising issues.
So maybe let me say that, I would say, can we combine it, that question with the slide on the code? Because we have a question on as to what does the council expect from us in terms of fulfilling the mandate under the code? So maybe that is a good way to pair them together. What do you folks think? I think that would be a good thing.
All right, well, let's hear a motion. Again, do you want to clarify the motion?
So I
one more
move
time?
that we attach our work plan, acknowledging that it's always going to be a working process. We attach the work plan.
This is
to
not
the-
a voting item. It's listed as a discussion item.
Okay, well then, I would recommend that the committee.
Yeah, I
do
think
that.
you can just work with the good faith of your colleagues and make suggestions. These two individuals were tasked with this task, and you have given them feedback, and they will go back and revise the presentation and give it to staff.
And they've applied for sainthood doing this one.
Okay. Any other further discussion? And then, because we'll just go ahead and close this item.
For further discussion, and just because it's on TV and it is an open meeting, where is it going to be?
The meeting will be October 21st, I believe 6 p.m., usually in council chambers, but sometimes even staff does not know that till we go as we lead up to the week. It's possible it's in this room, but I doubt it. It's probably most likely going to be in chambers, but I will let you know that.
We've eaten into some of the last item.
I will be very quick.
Update on the LGBTQ subcommittee. I ask Commissioner Stinger and Lee to give us a brief update, please.
Chair. Can I be excused?
Sure.
Thank you.
And thank you. It's nice to see you.
I'll try to come
I
back.
know you're working very hard.
I'll try to come back again.
And thank you for all your work on community conversations.
Send me an email.
I just wanted to use this opportunity to summarize some of the outcomes that we've had. Just quickly as background, because I learned some things as I went back to my notes. This came out of a council resolution to be a diverse community in December 16, I believe. And this was one of 6 areas that we submitted to council as a result of that. And so it doesn't stand alone, but it is representative of our work to validate the concept of a diverse community. We did a lot of, I am going to just railroad through this. Please stop me if it's too much of a speeding wreck. We did a lot of study. We began with a listening forum. We did had an intern working on data collection. We did a paper survey. We did a focus group. We did some personal interviews. And the study recommendations, I just want to go through these because I was surprised at how close we've come, was to convene a summit, to build a structure of ongoing support for the LGBTQ community, formalize the advisory body for teens and seniors, to leverage the expertise and involvement of existing service providers, focus on programming, visibility, and space, developing messaging and host events. Well, as we have proceeded, then we began with our summit in March, We brought together 30 representatives from county and city governments, city and school libraries, service providers, and faith-based communities. And that group, independent of us, chose 5 areas of emphasis: visibility, activities, education training, operational structures, and space. And since that initial meeting, we've had 2 further follow-up meetings of the working group. And from that, we have had the City Department of Recreation working with the Family Services Organization, hosting an LGBTQ Allies and Family Movie Night at Mitchell Park. They had better access to change pages than I do. Great poster, they showed Matilda. They are also looking at leveraging current city events like the Mayfest, the Chili Cook-Off, to encourage an LGBTQ cooking team, chili team, and maybe another movie night. Education and training, the Fletcher PTA is considering sponsoring another parent ed evening similar to the one they sponsored a year ago. The library, our city library, mostly through our teen librarian, continues to support programming with resources or reference centers in city libraries. Under operational structures, representatives of the Human Services Department, our city's department, the Family Y and ACS are planning a session for November of this year. The target audience will be staff of city departments and community organizations, focusing on best practices regarding gender-inclusive language and signage. We are leveraging a campaign that the County Office of LGBTQ Affairs has for signage for all gender restrooms. So taking that campaign forward. Thank you, Commissioner Lee. The biggest excitement probably is around space. And the end of July, the grand opening occurred for the LGBTQ Cafe. And from that, we have an initiative in North County that Supervisors Smitty and submitted to the Board of Supervisors, the county board. So I will just read this. In his resolution, he said, the Office of LGBTQ Affairs, the county office, through listening forums, identified the need for LGBTQ services based in North County. The Palo Alto Human Relations Commission hosted its own stakeholder groups where Avenidas offered its new cafe as an intergenerational socialization site. So I was pleased that we got mentioned in his resolution and recognized for intergenerational activities and space, which were 2 of our early on objectives. His referral was that the county administration, and that would be the Office of LGBTQ Affairs, explores all opportunities to partner with Avenidas to host services in North County, and includes mental health, general health care, cultural competency training, legal services, housing, intergenerational activities. And the outcome of his resolution was that it was passed unanimously by the County Board of Supervisors at their September meeting, and it was sent to their administration, to partner with Avenidas to put together a budget. And that will be presented at the first meeting in December with the budget and an implementation proposal. And so they're working on that contract not as we sit, but currently working on that contract. And they will present it back to the Board of Supervisors on December 10th. And quote from the head of that department, Maribel Martinez, "It would be great to have community participation at that meeting." So I will be asking again if people can go to the Board of Supervisors meeting or write a letter. Their agendas are worse than our council, so going down may not be feasible. That's one strength that reflects back to our very early objectives. And the second was that a steering committee from the working group, a steering committee has evolved, and we have met a couple times, and they are taking over the leadership. So we will phase from a leadership to a liaison position very appropriately. And they're quite aggressive and quite engaged. So I tried to quickly brief people on where we were, and I'm open to questions.
I think when we discussed liaisons that staff was open to adding liaisons, so I would ask that you communicate. I'm sure that both yourself and Commissioner Lee would like to be the liaisons for that group, and I suggest that we add that to our presentation if it's effective. Do we need a formal vote on a liaison to that group? Maybe we could add that to the agenda the next time.
Let me get back to you on that.
Let's make sure we formalize it.
We will, yeah, I think I might be, I'm looking forward to switching from leadership to liaison, because I think it's appropriate for this phase of the project, but we might not be right there just yet.
So
It might
there's
be
still a lot of-
February or March.
There's
yeah.
still a lot of support work that we can play while we do the transition, so I wouldn't say it's a strict flip to
Yeah.
liaison.
Okay,
at
so
this point.
if that takes time, then just let us know and
Yeah, we will.
let us be supportive of your efforts.
Thank you. Great. Appreciate that.
Okay, this is it's an update, so it doesn't have anything other than discussion. If anyone would like to raise a point of discussion?
Patty, would you mind showing folks the oh, you passed, did you pass them away?
I'm a little confused. Aren't we on commissioner reports?
No, not yet. We're on the update of the LGBTQ.
Oh, sorry,
subcommittee.
I thought we had moved on.
All right. Okay, we will move on to
Can I say thank you so
commissioner
much?
reports.
Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, yeah, you right, somewhere.
Thank you.
Why don't we start on this side of the table? Commissioner Lee, commissioner reports.
For once, I'll keep it brief. Everyone just take a look at the flyer. We have the anti-bullying movie night going on, not this weekend, but the following Saturday. We have quite a number of community partners who are helping publicize the event.
This is
I've
so
already reached out to
exciting.
the
Thank
city's
you.
communications manager, and she's going to be including it on the city's website and some of the other advertising venues that the city uses, but those agencies have been publicizing it. Patty's been very good about putting up flyers. So it's a very simple event, to help start conversations around bullying, and hopefully at the same time, folks can learn more about some of the community groups who have services that might benefit them. So
I'd like to thank you for the movie selection, because I did preview the movie.
Patty actually suggested it. So
It's,
In my own family, I have a child with special needs who has certainly not the issue that this young man has, but in part does have this issue, and has faced some interactions with her classmates over issues of appearance. And I just want to thank you for this. I will bring my kids to this event.
maybe you can
I
make
want-
some remarks.
Well, we'll see. I don't want to upstage you. I thank
wanted
you
it-
for the movie.
this movie was chosen from myself, but also some fifth graders that love this book. But also I reached out to the International Bullying Prevention Association, the executive director, and she suggested that movie too before I
It's a
pushed it
great
out.
selection. I'm
Yeah.
thanking you
it
personally.
wasn't-
Thank you. Okay.
And did you do the brochure, the flyer? Very nice job.
Yep, very nice job. Okay, other commissioners, your report?
Yeah, I wanted to say, I also worked with the library, so they have at Mitchell Park, and they have a display mostly about kindness, but they're gonna put this up, and they have a display in books and stuff, so I was working with them on that. And they're also letting us have a table on Saturday at the Mitchell Park, not this Saturday, but the following, where I'm gonna have brochures about this, but also a little bit about Human Relations Commission and promoting the movie on Saturday. Through this, I also, one of the groups is called Rock, which is on here, and they're a group of students from Gunn, and I was asking them at some point if we could come to their meetings, which is a Tuesday at lunch, and I talked to the student president, Abigail Sullivan, and she said that she would love for some of us to come, to come and listen to their team's perspective, and I'm specifically thinking about their position on what they thought about vaping and what we can do, and also other issues like the cell phones, which was becoming, anyway, and she said she would love for some of us to come to their meetings and hear their perspective. I also got a discussion from a concerned citizen. Her name is Gina Palma, and she's also Senior Vice President of Public Policy of Silicon Valley Community Foundation. And she said she would like to work her interest is housing and pilgrims, and she had an idea that we could maybe do a competition at some point. So I could bring that up, which would be to interview children about what it means to be a today's pilgrim, which is kind of on the line of the welcoming and competition. So I'll bring that up later. The librarian also was saying that in December is housing. There's their displays for Mitchell Park, and we could have a display of organizations that work with and a table of that to inform communities about housing issues and groups. And then there's a whole list. I've written to ask the UN, the UNICEF, the woman that works on the Child Initiative, Kid Friendly, to see if we could have more information about it. And that's it. And also, I was asked, there's a conference in November, and I don't know, on kindness from the International Bullying Association. It's in Chicago. And I don't know, I would go, but I don't know if I don't know what the process is, when I represent does that have to be voted on? I don't know. So it's more of asking an information. If I go to this conference on the International Bullying Association.
You can go as an individual who happens to be a Human Relations Commissioner. Title for identification purposes only. You can't say the commission said X unless
No,
we did say
I
right,
knew that
so
part. I just thought I might.
I attend a lot of
probably
meetings as Stephen, Human Relations Commissioner.
Well, we can think about an agenda. When is it in November, Patty?
At the beginning.
At the beginning. Well, we may miss it this time, but thank you for letting us know. And
Yeah, it's called Kindness and Compassion, and it's November 7th and 9th.
So you may miss it for this upcoming meeting in terms of the agenda, but I think agendizing items like that is okay with me. And we'll just have to do it that way, and I'm sorry we didn't have prior notice.
Yeah, I just found out about it when I was talking to her about the movie.
All right.
That's
Commissioner
it.
Savage, anything that you have to add to Commissioner reports? No. Commissioner Stinger.
Yes, I have a few things. First of all, my apologies to Ashley. I wanted to ask her to give a plug for YCS Make a Difference Day, Saturday, October 26th, 9 to 1:30. Lots of projects going on throughout the
I'll be planning a tree at the Baylands if people want to join me there. They have a lot of slots open.
There
If
you
you want to
go.
do it as a commission building thing, you can do it, sign up independently, but.
Okay, that's a great idea.
I do have a question, though. Could we put something about, like, activities that we're doing, the Human Relations Commission, on our website?
I'm working on that.
Like, could we put about the movie?
Well, I can put I'm working with somebody with the city to help me fix the website so it has tables and I can add additional things. Right now it doesn't, so it just kind of floats there, so I'm working on it.
The second event that I just wanted to give notice to was I've been working with Palo, or I frequently communicate with Palo Alto University, and they are doing a program on racial healing in queer and trans communities. And that's Wednesday, October 30th, and I'll circulate that. it's a dinner and a lecture for the community. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was I am the liaison, or I represent the HRC on the Healthy Cities, Healthy Communities task force, I guess that's what it is. And we were talking about issues that concerned us as we begin our year, and youth vaping was one of those. And Becky Beacom from PAMP has stood up and is ready to organize a community leader breakfast. It came out of the discussion about emerging issues, and she and I have been writing. She has approval to do this through PAMP. She's approaching PTA Council. She's down to logistics about finding dates, getting speakers, and would very much like to work with our committee to take this forward. I'll just read from her note to me because I think it's very compelling. My experience is that these powerful connections are made, important conversations happen in the room, everybody is hearing the same information. Angst is calm when people have a clearer picture of the problem and have a sense that we can do something to help. Attendees come up with innovative ideas and run with them. It's efficient and usually inspiring. So we're looking at a stakeholder breakfast with people who can make a difference in this community. And I obviously have several notes here, but that's enough to summarize.
Approximate time?
November.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's put that on the agenda for next time, okay, Valerie? I think, one of the things that I've noticed is that this issue on vaping has caught some fire in terms of community interest, and I think, the stunning statistics and news that we see every day tells us that we have to take some action. And, health professionals, community leaders, school board members, city council members, it's something that I think we need to be a leader on. I think one of the comments tonight about being a leader or a follower as a community, we need to lead on this, and we really need to get to the bottom of it. We've got to protect our children, and it's very emergent. It's not something that we can put off. It's more than simply someone smoking a cigarette. And down the road, 20 years, being unable to kick the habit. This is something that happens to teenagers who are using e-cigarettes, vaping, and they get thousands of cases that no one, not even, the most elite scientists and doctors have been able to figure it out. And as I said before, if this were Tylenol or some other thing, the product would be off the shelves. And when I walk into Rotten Robbie in Mountain View next to my kids' schools, I don't want it there. And other communities have done similar things. Other states have done similar things.
Well, I just
So I think, that's why this is catching fire. I'm so pleased for you that you're taking these steps. Thank you.
I just wanted to point out that this is to me a strong suit. We are leveraging community partners. We're leveraging community partners to put on the event, and we will use the expertise in the room to get the job done.
Could I ask about stakeholders? Because I was looking into it, and a pediatrician from the Academy of Pediatricians sent me a thing about that, and then also this educational group. I think I sent it to somebody, Daryl, somebody.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, for the stakeholders, are they also asking teen groups, teen leaders, not just adults?
No, they have done these community breakfasts for 6 or 7 topics over a 20-year period. I think Project Safety Net came out of this.
Yeah,
No, I don't mean.
I hear you. Yes, they will. They will look, as possible to get representatives. When they did the Project Safety Net thing, there were youth groups there.
No, I'm not talking about youth groups, because youth groups have adult coordinators. I'm asking if they're asking youth.
That's what I meant.
Okay.
That youth will be invited. But these are youth representing groups. This is a community stakeholder group, so they go back and can affect change within the realms of organization that they are coming from.
Like one of the examples she gave was some students from Gunn who attended another session and then returned to campus and started an initiative on campus.
That's what we're looking for.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Thank you for your leadership on that, Commissioner Stinger. Commissioner Shu.
Only one thing to report. Thanks to Commissioner Lee. He coordinated the meeting with Rick. Remember, we had an informal meeting at the library. We were talking about senior resource from. He's sitting on the county.
He's on the county senior care
senior care
committee, and we met at
Right.
the Avenidas
Yeah.
intergenerational LGBTQ space. And given Xing Feng's interest in seniors, I thought he lives in Palo Alto and he's on the county commission, so why not pair the two together?
Yeah, I was seeking some guidance or the information from the county side to see how we can leverage to support our community. So basically, that's all the thing. I did in the last month. We agreed to probably we'll meet again to also talk to the other city to see how we can leverage the city from for supporting the seniors. Thank you.
Okay, no council liaison report tonight. Staff liaison.
I have nothing to report.
Tentative agenda for next regular meeting.
So I think for November, we have tentatively scheduled the homelessness discussion from the county's office, supportive housing. Mika, was Kristen able to confirm whether she would be able to come back with her?
I don't
Parks and
recall. I
Rec-
thought she just communicated with you two on that, so I don't know.
Okay. Last time I spoke with her, she said that probably November, but she would coordinate with you.
Okay,
Let me
so I have
re-
not heard from
Okay,
her,
okay.
so that.
So it looks like homelessness and probably the Parks and Rec issue that came up during the summer is likely to come back in November. So November's probably going to be pretty full.
Wasn't there a speaker that was going to come this time that couldn't? I forgot.
So Abilities United,
Yeah.
they had just recently merged with GatePath, and they reached out to me, and they want to come speak, so they will be coming to the November meeting.
Did we want to consider moving the meeting to 6? Because I think at least the two, homelessness and Parks and Recs, are going to be big, meaty items. And if we're having a speaker too.
I personally can't
Okay,
show up
okay,
at 6
okay.
o'clock, but if
Just thought
other
I'd throw it
people
out
can-
there because, it might be a long meeting.
Yeah,
but-
no, it's not possible for me. All right, we're going to go ahead and, I'm sorry?
Oh, are we talking about the agenda?
We're on the agenda, yes.
So I would like to have a more discussion about today's pilgrim and
Today's pilgrim?
remember I was talking about Gina Palma was wanting us to be part of this competition and something to start talking about immigration in my report. I was the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, and how she wanted to see if we wanted to be part of, this is her as a concerned citizen, to make awareness about how, sort of like continuation of the welcoming issue. Mm-hmm. And-
Do you think she would come to a meeting, or you want to try to schedule that through staff?
I was more thinking that if we could both. We're kind of doing it together, talking. She brought it up, and then we started talking.
Maybe we could just check with staff to see
About-
if she can come either November or December to the meeting.
No, it wasn't more. It was more of to have it on the agenda to talk about, and I could do the talk about today's program. What my vision is, and we could vote whether or not we want to go forward on that.
Does this fit into a work plan item, and which one?
It does. It does it on many of them. It goes on the unhoused. It goes on immigrants, which you and I are working on. Goes on inclusion.
Okay, I don't have my bearings because I don't know that, but if there is another lead or assisting commissioner on one of the work plan items, and you wanted to contact them to second the agenda item, just inform Minka. Okay?
Well, what do you mean? I've never done, so what do I need to do?
You just, as long as you have someone else that would second that discussion from the work plan, then you simply just give that to Minka, and we'll try to schedule it for this coming meeting.
But didn't we just put something else about other things on here without seconds?
Those ones were previously agendized.
Okay.
But
Okay.
if it falls under housing, you and I, as the leads.
And immigrants, which you and I are on. that.
I just don't have the bearings to interact with you on that,
Okay.
but once we do, that can get on the
Okay.
agenda, all right?
You two.
Yeah.
Okay.
Since it falls more under.
Yeah,
Okay.
and then at that point, it will be up to staff and leadership to, I guess there's an active meeting, so either we'll try it for next time or the time after.
So Mary reminded me that the HRC in their email box this Monday got an email from the president of interim vice president of Foothill College. Yes, Foothill College. And they said, because you're an important part of the local community, the Foothill De Anza College District is seeking that Palo Alto HRC's perspective on our students' educational needs and priorities. We have launched an initiative to engage the district's employers, students, and residents in our vision for preparing the next generation for college transfers and jobs. Last month, the district surveyed thousands of residents and would like to quickly share the results with the commission and gather additional input from your members. I'm writing to ask if an upcoming commission meeting would have time to present President Nguyen of Foothill College to make a brief presentation. This could be accomplished in 5 to 10 minutes. So,
Is that something that you think might fit through our, any of our initiatives? So that we can identify, because I don't
see, students' educational needs and priorities. I could just say that if this is not something you're interested in, I could ask him to give,
it might be good to inform him
written-
of our initiatives back and say that, our present initiatives are these. Can you gear your presentation toward one of these initiatives?
I don't know if he can, because he's giving results of a very specific study that they have done.
What if we just ask them to send us the study?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking to.
And then we can review it?
I can say they aren't
Yeah.
able to accommodate this on the agenda, but can you send okay.
All right, very
Okay.
good. All right, not hearing any further agenda items, we're going to adjourn at 9:37. Thank you so much.